Welcome, everybody. It's the official start time, but the join rate is still very high. So, as usual, let's give it a few minutes until the join rate slows. Again, the join rate is still very high. We'll give it just a moment more. All right, the join rate is slowing. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. A reminder, these sessions are being recorded, will appear on YouTube. If possible, please share video. We like for these meetings to be as close to what we can get in person as we can. The agenda is in the notes page, linked in the chat. The outline of that notes page serves as the agenda for the meeting. Does anybody see anything missing? Is there something that anyone would like to add to the agenda? Not hearing anything, I'll jump in. We'll start with a report on the email processing transition. A week ago, Monday, we moved the mail processing system from IETF to a new server in a different place in the cloud. That transition went relatively smoothly. The outage landed, what outages there were, landed within the outage period that was expected. There were no messages lost. There was minimal disruption. The data tracker, for example, was not able to submit during the outages, but we were able to resubmit the messages that it wanted to submit at the end of the outage. There was one detail that we missed. As I mentioned in the notes, we did not have the TLSA records aligned properly after we made the move. We just missed that we were changing the name in the MX record and didn't have that name reflected in TLSA. We've adjusted things so that those will stay in sync going forward. There were a few other small issues that didn't affect things until yesterday. Everyone here noticed that yesterday mail was heavily delayed. Part of that is that the new system is a smaller system than IETF was. IETF was just a very monstrous machine. We didn't need quite that much power for the mail system going forward. However, on this new system, we have noticed that there are issues with its IO operations per second that we need to address, and the notes speak to this. Noticing this was exacerbated by two things. One, there was an event in the underlying file system that slowed it down a little bit more than it had been before we got to Monday. To the internet draft submission deadline was bringing, of course, the last minute submissions of drafts, each of which gets announced on lists some of which have many, many subscribers. So the system got behind. As it got behind, it compounded and got further behind. We were taking what actions we could. We made some adjustments. Whether they helped or not, we're still analyzing, and we believe that the main thing that we need to address is the underlying system's capacity for I/O to its disk. And we're in the process of working through that. Since email itself was impaired, we used other channels to announce that things were not working correctly. The blog, status.ietf.org. Greg made sure that whatever the social media tools that we had called attention to it. I did send a note to the lists using email as a happy coincidence. It turns out that as mail comes in, one of the first things that happens to it is that it goes into the archive, and then work takes place to send the message out to list subscribers. So the messages did appear in the archive very quickly, and someone looking in the archive would be able to see that something was happening and get some explanation for it. By now, hopefully everybody's had a chance to read through the details of what's in the notes. Does anybody have any questions about the transition and about yesterday's difficulties? So I will highlight that with this move, we're considering the infrastructure transition project that we started early last year to be complete. There are still major infrastructure. Thank you, Wes. There are still major infrastructure issues that we are continuing to work on, improving the data tracker, giving it to take advantage of blob storage and other techniques. There's a big focus on the RSC production centers tooling to, as you'll see on the IETF tools list, address issues like the RSC 10K problem. So we are continuing to move forward, but it is a nice dot on the projects that we started a little bit earlier. Moving on.
Congratulations. I mean, that's a major, that's been a long time and a long planning coming. So well done. I know it took longer than you were hoping to. So.
Thank you. So moving on to the next topic. A little over a week ago, nearly 2 weeks ago at this point, we released a version of the data tracker that began writing each artifact that it created to blob storage, as well as writing it to disk in anticipation of moving away from the shared file system that we currently have in place, because the artifacts that the data tracker controls need to be exposed at the web server and the rsync server and other places. We've been watching its behavior and learning from where writes to the blog store fail and why writes to the blob store would fail before we changed the data tracker over to consuming from the blob stores. One of the things that we're learning is we're probably, I mean, at this point, I think definitely going to need to add to the architecture that the writes to the blob stores become asynchronous. Currently, they are inline in processing with the HTTP request. Somebody does, for instance, adding a ballot to ballot position, the writes for the information that go along with that, or when they take a I'm trying to avoid talking about ID submission, sorry, because that's far more complicated than everything else. But adding a directorate review or adding a BOF request or a conflict review document or any of these things, it's done in line with the HTTP request. When they hit the submit button, it's a post. These rights happen as part of that post before the return comes back from the post. We're going to need to make changes such that this gets handed off to an asynchronous process that the post returns, which means that we're going to have to take some care with each of the views in the data tracker that what happens after that post returns can deal with the artifacts not having quite made it to the blog store yet. So that's work that we're going to have in front of us. I guess I would like to note that we at least have been successful in getting this first set of rights to the blob store to happen without disrupting the people's workflows. As we're moving the documents that we have in the file system into the blob stores, we are noting again that we have a mess of a problem with data curation going into the deep past with internet drafts in particular. There are old internet drafts out there with random various character encodings before the attempt to really standardize character encodings and capture whatever that character encoding was became a thing that the internet did, but particularly our community did. So we're taking what steps we can to capture that information so that we can let the other components that are going to be using these blob artifacts do the right thing when it comes time to use them. Any questions about what we're doing with respect to the data tracker blob storage or other uses on that front? And now take forward to talking about how we're going to make changes and why we're going to make changes for some of the URL paths as we are re-implementing rfceditor.org. Matthew, if you're willing, I'd like to not be the only person talking on the call for once. Could you jump in here?
Sure. Yeah, so we're in the process of re-implementing rfceditor.org and re-implementing all of the APIs. So this is a little bit of reverse engineering, and there's been a lot of tests throughout this process to try and make sure that we don't have any unnecessary changes in these APIs to try and provide consistency. There are, however, some types of changes that we're going to have to do for a little bit of future-proofing. So one of these that Robert alluded to was the RFC 10K issue. So that's to do with when we have 5 digits in RFC IDs, and it means that we need to well, we've decided to no longer have leading zeros in a lot of RFC IDs, and there'll be there's notes in this tools call notes. There's mention there of how anyone that is building software around these APIs from RFC editor needs to make sure that they, of course, parse these things properly and don't just assume everything's 4 digits anymore. There are some other changes where all of the URLs that are leading to HTML pages will end in a trailing slash now. This is just for consistency because it was inconsistent before across the site. There'll always be redirects established though, so as long as your HTTP client is configured to follow redirects, then it should be fine. Most HTTP clients do, but not all. So if you do happen to have an API client that has problems there, then yeah, you may need to reconfigure it. The other issue is that we're working through writing a change log of all of the API changes. So essentially this will be documentation that any developer building on top of these APIs will be able to refer to, and we should be able to have sample responses of all of the APIs as well, so that you can test your APIs ahead of time before the new site is released. I think that's about it. That's sort of the broad, big picture. Are there any other details you'd like me to mention, Robert?
Anybody have any questions for Matthew? I guess one way I'd like to restate some of what's here is, and because I don't think Carson's actually on the call, even though he's logged into Zulip. There is, we are repeatedly reminded that good URLs don't change. We're going to have to change some URLs as part of this process, and we're designing them to take advantage, new URL structure to take advantage of the current web architecture, being able to utilize the CDNs in particular. So. All right, if there aren't any other questions. The last, well, the next thing I've got under our hot topics is just a quick note on the liaison management tooling. Suresh and Miria posted a couple of BIS drafts between the last call and this one that change, that they're expected to update the specification around how the community processes liaison statements. I'm digesting those and making sure that they're reflected in the requirements for the tooling that we're going to be working on, but we haven't started working on coding for that new tooling yet. If there's anybody that's been involved in that, I know Wes, you've got a close eye on it. If there's anything that should be called out, please jump in.
Thanks. I mean, I was involved as a liaison coordinator up until last year, and in March I'll actually be off the IEB, so I suspect there will be a new tools liaison from the IEB, because it won't be me. So we'll know more, I guess, in a couple of weeks. So I encourage you to work with somebody new, and it would be good. Maybe I'll try and encourage one of the liaison coordinators to actually be the IEB liaison to the IETF tools, considering that work is ramping up. That makes sense to me, at least.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. The last thing I've got under hot topics is that the April's tool call moved from its normal position to a week later on April 15th to avoid conflicting with the RPC and tools retreats that'll be happening the week prior to that. As usual, the rest of the agenda is meant to be taken as read, but if anyone has something they want to call out in those sections, or if you've read it and have questions about anything that's there, please jump in now.
Yeah, just one question. I had in mind that it was Sarah doing the ID nits, and now it's Nick. Is it a change, or I was basically wrong?
Yeah, you missed it. Nick had been doing the original XML work for IDNets 3, and we were working with a contractor at Admiral Studios to help fill in the text part of it. That is moving quickly, but you might have been, what I think you might have seen was that Kasara is making sure that when we have versions of it ready for people to try, that it's deployed at Author Tools.
Okay, most probably. Thank you. And the other point, there was some discussion for ISG statement about the NIST document. regarding DEI. So is it linked to the issue you are mentioning into the FYI there? There is one point on this. Bib XML service. And this data set is stored.
I think those are
No, that's not related.
completely independent
Isn't
things.
it clear? Okay. Thank you. That's all for me.
If nobody has anything else, I have two AOB just to update people on.
Please.
So the first one is we have employed a new developer to replace Sang Ho, who left last November. This is Rudy Matz. Rudy is based in Montreal and will start next Monday. Rudy is a back-end developer, and so will be working on data tracker and whatever other things Robert tells him he has to work on. So he'll be joining us shortly. Okay. Any questions or anything on that? No. And then the second thing is to let you know that we are well underway with our RFP for cybersecurity services. That closed yesterday, and we now have a number of bids in. We went through a drought some years ago where we got very few bids for anything, and now we're getting many more bids for things, though this is the first one so far, which is great news. We have been out to the community to ask for people who would work with us on this, and Paul Wouters is on the call, has put his hand up as someone with experience, so he'll be working with us, and Benson Mute has also offered to help as well, so there'll be the two community people who work with me and the others on the SOAR team to evaluate these responses. We have until after Bangkok in order to make a decision, because we've got quite a bit of work to go through. But this, from my initial read of the proposals, it looks like things are going well now in this area, so I'm quite pleased with that. Any questions about that at all? No? Great, thank you.
Awesome. Anyone have any other business? Hopefully many of you will join us at the code sprint before 122. As I noted in a message I just sent to the list, if you've not updated your development environment in several weeks, you should tear down what you have and rebuild it from scratch at this point. You can use your same checkout, just make sure your Docker environment is completely reset, as the structure of the containers for the development environment has radically changed. So thanks everyone again. Hopefully we'll see many of you in Bangkok, and then the rest we'll see in April's Tools Call. Thank you for your input. We'll talk to you soon.